First, Viktor Orban, who's been in power for 12 years.
Akkora győzelmet arattunk, hogy még a Holdról is látszik, de Brüsszelből egészen biztosan.
Next, Andrzej Duda, who's been in power for 7 years.
Żyje polska rodzina, niech żyje nasza tradycja. Nie wolno nam nikomu pozwolić nam jej odebrać. Nikomu.
And now Giorgia Meloni, creating Italy's most far-right government since the fascist era of Mussolini.
L'Europa sono un po' preoccupati dalla Meloni. Che succederà? E che succederà? Che è finita la pacchia. Succederà che anche l'Italia si metterà a difendere i suoi interessi nazionali.
This trend can be seen all over Europe, as the share of votes in European countries for right-wing populists has increased from 5% in the 1990s to almost 20% in the 2010s. Right-wing populist parties are often Eurosceptic and present a significant threat to the European project. Actually, let me rephrase that. I believe the European Union will eventually fail if no action is taken against the underlying reasons of why people are voting for these parties. Thus, this video will explore: what is right-wing populist ideology? What does this mean for the EU? And what can the EU do about it? Right-wing populists tend to focus on two main voter grievances. Firstly, economic deprivation, with a focal point on households who are struggling to make ends meet. A survey in 2018 showed that 50% of Europeans feel worse off than 20 years ago, and 58% of Europeans are pessimistic about their future. With the recent COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and inflation, these numbers are likely to be much worse, and the right-wing populists do a great job of playing into these insecurities. Secondly, social deprivation, where people feel disconnected from society. There's a lot of cultural anxiety throughout the EU, where individuals feel that their ethnic culture, way of life, and security are under threat. Mainstream parties are often unable to adequately address these two voter grievances, and this is where the right-wing populist parties are grabbing votes. They claim that these grievances can be addressed by reducing immigration, establishing national sovereignty, opposing environmentalism, reducing globalization, and promoting conservative family values. And this is where the EU is often a scapegoat, especially when it comes to immigration and sovereignty, which are the two right-wing solutions we are going to discuss in this video today. Let's start with immigration.
Votre quartier, votre village, l'école de vos enfants, votre vie, votre niveau de salaire seront inévitablement impactés par le choc.
Legal refugees, such as those from the war in Ukraine, are protected by the EU's temporary protection scheme. But illegal immigration, mainly from the south, is once again becoming a problem, entering the EU through one of 5 main routes. There is the Western Balkan route, from Serbia into Hungary and Croatia, the Eastern Mediterranean route, from Turkey to Greece and Cyprus, the Central Mediterranean route, from Northern Africa into Italy, the Western Mediterranean route, from Northern Africa into Spain, and finally, the Western African route, from Western Africa to Spain via the Canary Islands. The Western Balkan route is the most popular, with more than 100,000 illegal crossings this year already, followed by the Central Mediterranean route, with around 65,000 illegal crossings. These numbers have increased significantly over the last 3 years. Therefore, it may come as no surprise that Italy and Hungary have voted anti-immigration parties into power. Even the Spanish far-right party, Vox, is currently polling at 15% and could be part of a coalition in the Spanish government next year. Trump's best hits, such as building a wall to keep the Mexicans out, are also making it across the Atlantic, as Meloni in Italy has proposed the creation of a naval blockade off the coast of northern Africa to stop migrants coming to Europe. Or Orban, who proposed no immigration whatsoever to be allowed for 2 years. And it's not just the south of Europe. In Sweden, a right-wing populist party, who also opposes immigration, are now part of the Swedish government for the first time ever. All of this is bad news for the EU, as right-wing populists claim that the EU is at fault for the rise in immigration, thereby fueling Euroscepticism. And this is partially justified, as since the migrant crisis in 2016, the EU has struggled to find a common EU immigration policy. It's not for a lack of trying, as the EU has debated over a new pact on immigration and asylum for years, but sadly with very little to show for it. The EU urgently needs to figure out how to better protect its borders, help EU member states with an influx of migrant arrivals, return unsuccessful asylum seekers back to their home countries, and create deals with countries from which the migrants originate. For instance, the EU is really bad at returning migrants whose application was unsuccessful. Since the early 2000s, the EU has agreed deals with more than 20 countries to send back migrants whose asylum claims in Europe have been rejected. Yet fewer than 1 in 3 migrants ordered to leave the European Union actually do, and that ratio drops to less than 1 in 5 when the country they are told to return to is outside of the European continent. The biggest problem here is that this actually encourages more illegal immigration, as migrants know that the returns are not effective, which will encourage them to come even more. The EU also needs to make more deals with the countries from which immigrants originate, for example, Serbia on the Western Balkan route. Any country that does not recognize Kosovo as an independent state can travel to Serbia visa-free, and these include countries such as Turkey, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and India. And as Serbia enjoys a visa-free travel arrangement with the EU, it makes it very easy for immigrants to illegally enter the Union. The EU has to tackle these 4 points sooner rather than later, otherwise more countries will vote right-wing, resulting in a very different Europe than we know today. That's it for immigration. Next up is another right-wing favorite, taking back national sovereignty, especially from the European Union.
If we want to be liberated, if we want to be a sovereign country again, we need to get rid of this institution that became very multilateral and very political instead of economical how it started.
Wilders from the Netherlands and most other populists claim that the EU threatens the autonomy, unity, and identity of their nation. They make 2 key arguments. Firstly, the EU is elitist and lacks democratic legitimacy and transparency. And secondly, the EU integration undermines national sovereignty and the nation-state. Let's start with the first right-wing argument. Unelected bureaucrats in Brussels are taking away your sovereignty. I hear this argument all the time, and it is one of the main reasons the UK left the bloc. Is this true though? Well, I made a whole video about this in the link above. But in short, the EU has to become more transparent on how the European Commission President is elected. Currently, the Commission President is chosen by the heads of state, behind closed doors, and then ratified by the European Parliament. However, there's no transparent process in which the heads of state determine their candidate. Why not have the EU Parliament elect the president directly, or maybe even have the European electorate vote for a president? Reform is urgently needed, and this would make the Union more democratic and also eliminate a key argument that is continuously presented by right-wing populists. Moving to the second argument, EU integration undermines national sovereignty. It is true that member states forfeit some national power to the European Union, but the vast majority of power still lies with the individual countries. This overview should give you an idea what the EU can regulate and what it can't. Nonetheless, the EU needs to drive more citizen involvement so that their feeling of identity is not only Italian, Polish, or Portuguese, but also European. Firstly, the EU can do a better job at driving citizen participation. 50% voter turnout, the highest it has been in 20 years, is simply not enough and needs to increase. Initiatives such as the Conference on the Future of Europe are a good start, as this will get more European citizens involved in EU politics. Secondly, the EU needs to battle misinformation. Myths about the number of migrant arrivals, their economic impact, or their tendency for crime are strategically promoted and exploited to influence public opinion. And thirdly, the EU needs a better marketing team, as people rarely know about EU successes or the EU ambitions on the world stage. The way I see it is that we live in a world with 2 global superpowers, China and the US, and before long, there will be a third, India. In comparison, our member states are small and can easily be bullied by a powerful neighbor. The EU, however, is a powerful entity and can protect the sovereignty of Europe on the global stage. How else are we going to tackle climate change, defense, and energy shortages? So there you have it, the final overview of what the EU should consider when it comes to immigration and sovereignty. In my opinion, the rise of right-wing populism is a serious threat to the European project, and it is time the EU adequately responds to it. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you like this content, please subscribe and like the video. Until next time.